Hello, and welcome back to Conversations with CVI. I'm Professor John Ravenscroft, and I'm back to my usual position, interviewing and chatting to people rather than being the interviewee. And today, I'm really grateful and extremely big thanks to Kathleen Vancleef, who's taken her time out of a busy day to talk to me today. And I'm really delighted to speak to you, Kathleen, because we are fellow psychologists, right? So we're in different positions, but so I know some of your work from all the various papers that you've written, but others might not know you so well. So Kathleen, please, who are you?
Okay. So yes, I'm a psychologist by background, but I'm mostly in the research field rather than working in a clinical environment. So I started my journey in research really looking at how visual perception works, how the brain interprets images that are coming from the eyes. And then, so towards the end of my PhD, I got really interested in how I can apply that knowledge from visual neuroscience, as we call it, into tools that are useful for clinical practice. So I've moved from a very experimental psychologist to more translational research. Yeah, but I keep an interest in both. I'm still fascinated by how the brain works. So I do a bit of research on stroke. So that's what brought me in to neuropsychology initially. But then also learned about CVI through my colleague Els Ortibus. So she knew about my work in stroke, and she came to me saying, wait a sec, that sounds very similar to the children I get. We really need to talk, and I would like to learn about your tools. So that was sort of the start of a years-long collaboration. I think we've been working together for 10 years now, something like that.
Oh, wow. That is a long time.
Yeah. I love working with your various interesting projects, trying to bring vision science into clinical use, basically.
Great. So let's have a wee chat about these tools and a little bit about your research, because I think we're beginning to use them. I think we're beginning to roll out, especially some of your recent papers have done that and looked at how they can be used with CVI. So rather than me talk about your tools such as CVIT and the Leuven, let's have a chat about that. So what tools have you developed, Kathleen, and how does actually, you know what? Before we go there,
Okay.
There's one question I've been dying to ask you, right? And it's a question that I get asked quite a lot, and I bumble my way through it in my own inevitable style. And that really is, because I know what your tools are doing, and that really is, what is the difference between perception and attention, right? So and why is that difference important? Why do we need to know and understand the difference between attention and perception? So can you help me with that?
It's quite a good one, and it's a hard one to answer, because in daily life they often express themselves in the same way. So people can have problems with attention but not with visual perception. They can see things but not pay attention to it, which is in adults quite common after a stroke, and call it visual inattention. So all the information is coming in, but they ignore, for instance, the left or the right side of space, and they eat half their plate.
So this is like a visual neglect kind of thing, where we know that it's there, but they just don't see it, but the information is coming in.
So that's really where you can see the two things being different. But in daily life, we indeed often use them at the same time.
Does one come before the other, or is that an old-fashioned kind of nonsense, or do we need to attend before we perceive, or do we perceive before we attend?
Oh, that's a big question.
Sorry, Kathleen.
No, that's fine. It's a big question in vision research that we're trying to answer, and I think there are arguments for both. I think it came up in previous conversations, the bottom-up versus top-down pathways in vision. So there's the bottom-up idea that you see things because they're salient. For instance, a high-vis vest is designed to attract your attention. So you see it before you pay attention because, yeah, this yellow color is so salient. So that's bottom up, where perception comes before attention. But the other thing around exists too. If you're in the shop and looking for your favorite bag of crisps, you're really focused on that, I don't know, green packaging. So that's, first you have attention for a certain packaging, and only then you perceive it in the shop. So both exist.
Yeah, so both of those, it's interesting, you know, these simple concepts require such complicated answers in some way, don't they? You know, it's because, yeah, we all sort of intuitively understand, well, I know what attention is, I know what I'm paying attention kind of thing, we know what perception is, but, you know, actually in vision science and in the work that we do, it's really hugely important, and, you know, we need to be able to understand which is which and which is calling on which process, and how they interact with each other, interweave with each other, and whether it's an attention deficit or whether it's a perception issue. You know, we ourselves as researchers need to be really clear, don't we? And it's not that clear, is it? It's
no, but we're still learning.
yeah, and it's really difficult. And I guess this leads us nicely, and you see the way I've done this, into some of your tools there, you see. So do you want to tell us some of the work that you've been doing, and talk us through some of the developments in the research that you've recently done, please?
Yeah. So most of my research is in developing assessment tools. So I'm sure everyone who has encountered a child or an adult with CVI will know making a diagnosis or describing what exactly is wrong is very challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest question I get. You know, how do you diagnose, and who should diagnose, and all of those things, and what assessment tool can I use? You know,
yeah. And there are some things out there, but nothing is really developed for children with CVI. It's sometimes for older children, or some of the tests are really old, or some of the tests tap into different things like attention and perception, and you can't really tell them apart. So what my tools try to do is take those different processes that can go wrong in CVI apart and test them individually. And the first one I did was actually for adults who was with a brain injury. So usually with acquired brain injury, and looking into what we call mid-level visual perception. So you can think of vision as a hierarchical process. So starting at the eye, where we do things like making sure we have a sharp image, so related to visual acuity. There's contrast sensitivity at that level. And then the information is sent to the brain, and the early areas in the brain need to build a picture, basically. So they need to bring lines and colors and shapes together into a structural image. And that building of a picture is called what we call mid-level perception. And once you've built a picture, then you can go along the ventral pathway and attach meaning to it and know, okay, this is a picture of a dog, a bear, or the dorsal pathway, try to interact with it. Okay, I know this is a cup, so I need to adjust my hand this way or that way. Or I know it's heavy or it's light, so I know how much force I need to put in to push this forward. So the initial tools for adults focus on this mid-level of perception, finding out how to build a picture and what is going well and what is not going very well. And then the tool for children between 3 and 6 years old, that's most useful for CVI. That looks a bit broader. So it looks into mid-level perception, also more high-level perception. So we look into object recognition there too, and different forms of motion perception. Yeah, so that are the assessment tools.
So what are they called?
So the adult one is called the Leuven Perceptual Organization Screening Test.
Right.
Quite a mouthful. And the other one is CVIT 3 to 6. so a children's visual impairment tool for 3 to 6 year olds.
Yeah, so I've looked at the CVIT test, right, and this is the one where I think it's becoming to be used a little bit more within our profession, within the work that we're doing. So, I mean, do you want to tell us just break it down a little bit more for us? How you know, is it difficult to use? Is it easy to use? Why did you come up with, you know, this particular age range and all of that, and all of those?
Yeah. So it's specifically designed for 3 to 6 year olds because we found there's very little in that for that age group available. It's very much developed with clinicians in mind, and we've involved them also. They told us what they need, and they also told us what they didn't want, which also helps. So it's fairly easy to use. It is an online test, so it runs on a website. You can go to the website, make your little profile, which is just your email address and your name. I think we ask where you work. And once you have your little profile, you can use the test as many times as you want, with as many children as you want. You don't need to type in their names. You can just use some codes or whatever, so we don't see that information. And you get, so the test takes about, yeah, it varies quite a bit. As we know, every child is different.
Yeah.
So between 15 minutes and 45 minutes, I think it's more or less the range.
Right. Okay. And I guess, you know, so this is a slightly unfair question because you know, I think this is really quite an important test that people are, like I say, becoming to use, and it's great to have this conversation so we can talk about it a little bit more. But I mean, do you want to talk to me about because I got asked this yesterday, right? So and this is about reliability, you know, and validity of it. So how did you go about ensuring that it actually measures what it measures, you know, the validity argument, and that it is reliable, and that I can take it and use it with the children that I see, and it will be fine. And then, you know, I know that Kathy Williams uses it, and that'll be fine, and Rachel, and so forth. So, you know, so how did you just go about doing that, just so we can understand the science of developing these kind of tests?
Yeah, that was an important part for us. So reliability, we asked children to do our test multiple times. So we asked them to do it twice with about 2 weeks in between, and then we compared the results, and we found that we more or less get the same results, very similar results. So we know that test results are consistent. That's the reliability. And then validity has to do with that it indeed measures what we wanted to measure. It measures visual perception functions and not intelligence or autism traits and stuff like that. So for that, we did quite a few things. So we asked children to not only do our test, but also do L94. That's an earlier developed test for visual perception problems in CVI. We asked them to do an intelligence test. Parents were asked to fill in a questionnaire around autism. They got visual acuity tests. And then we checked whether the visual acuity and the scores on the autism questionnaire and the intelligence influenced the scores on CVIT in any way. And it wasn't too bad. We found some correlations. But we think, for instance, we found some correlations with intelligence. So people who scored higher on the intelligence test were also doing better on our test. But when we then looked and thought a bit further about the intelligence tests we used, many of the things in there were pictures. So it was arranging pictures in a certain order, building some patterns with blocks. So all those things are very challenging if you have visual perception problems. And that means that your score on the intelligence test is low because of your visual perception problems, not because you're not intelligent. So that was our idea, but we wanted to be sure. So we also asked different groups of children to do our CVIT test. We asked children who got the diagnosis of CVI. We asked children who were typically developing, and as far as the parents were aware, did not have any problems in their development. And we asked children who were in a special needs school and who had a clear diagnosis of a severe developmental problem. So there was one group with cerebral vision impairment, one group with a more intellectual impairment, and one group typically developing. And then it became very clear that the children with CVI scored lower on our test, while the children with an intellectual impairment, they did quite well on our test.
Okay. Yeah.
So it seems that intelligence is not much to do with the results on their test.
Yeah. So the test, in the language that we would use, is sensitive. You know, it's sensitive to visual perception deficits and things.
Yeah. And one more thing that we also tried is wanted to check whether visual acuity had anything to do with it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So for that, well, it's very difficult. What we wanted to do, and what we're still working on, is having children with low vision problems, but without diagnosed CVI, do our test and see whether or how they perform. But our criteria were quite specific in that we only wanted low visual acuity and no other issues, but that is very, very... So instead we went another route and we simulated low visual acuity. So we gave children some low vision glasses and then see how they did. So typically developing children, we simulated poor acuity in them by giving them plus lenses and asked them to do the test. And they could still do it quite well. So poor visual acuity doesn't seem to affect test results either. So it really has to do with the visual processing and the higher visual functions rather than lower visual functions, we think.
And when do you think I should use the tests, and what will the results enable me to do?
Yeah. So Els uses this in her clinic. So when children are referred to her for an in-depth assessment on what developmental problems are going on. So it's one of the assessments they use to look into the visual perception functions to make a diagnosis. It's a multidisciplinary team, so they do a lot more than this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think we'll stress this a bit later, right? This is not a CVI diagnosis test, right?
No, it's not. No. But yeah, it can have a place in the diagnostic process.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That's one application. I was talking to a QTVI teacher yesterday, and she was really interested, and she could really see use in it for her when she gets a referral from a school or an eye clinic to use that as one of the first instruments to get an idea of what's going on and what are the next steps that she needs to take.
Right. Let's just pause there a second. So this is really great, and I know that many QTVIs watch these conversations with CVI staff, right? So I think I'm right there. So you're happy. We develop these tests, and we they should be only used in a clinical environment. But can you see them then being used by QTVIs or even with speech and language OTs or something like that to really start to share that data with ophthalmologists, pediatricians, and so forth? So it can be used in that environment.
Yeah, that's certainly my opinion. But again, this is my opinion. Not everyone will agree with that. But I very much feel that in CVI, in supporting children with CVI, we really need to tap from different disciplines, and people would bring in different kinds of knowledge. And with disciplines, I also include parents. They know a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's not just professional knowledge. So I find these, in the context of CVI, I sometimes find these, box thinking of this profession needs to do that, this profession needs that, not very helpful. So I'm very happy for my tool to be used by anyone with any professional background, as long as they have a strong interest and an understanding of what CVI means. I think that's more important, that you know what is CVI, and you have experience in working with that and work with others to do a diagnosis, set up a support package for people.
I mean, I think
Different
that's
people
great.
can.
I mean, I think getting that sorry, Kathleen, you know, I just think it's great that, you know, if you get a referral and you're not so sure, and again, it's part of that screening process, but I think it's part of that conversation you can use with the opthal or with the pediatrician.
Exactly.
Look,
Yeah.
I've done a CVIT, right? This is the results of the CVIT. You know, to me, you know, I want to refer you for, you know, an opt-out assessment and then a full CVI assessment. But from a QTVI position, I think that's great. You know, it's brilliant. It's great.
Yeah. It can help to quantify that gut feeling sometimes.
Yeah, and to use that. I mean, I guess I don't want to give you a long link, and I can't remember the link on it, and maybe I can put this on when I put this on. How do I find it, right? How do I find the CVIT test, right? How do I get hold of it?
Yeah. So as I said, it's online on the website, and I think the easiest is to include the link on the notes on the YouTube.
Yeah, no, I'll she'll do that as well. Yeah, I could do that. I mean, I think it's great. So so that's the CVIT test, right? Which is great. And well, thank you for developing that and thinking about that and getting it done. I think, you know, the more we think about assessments, the more we do that, I think the better it is. And the more we think about reliability, the more we think about, you know, sensitiveness, and the more we think about validity, the greater it can be. So I'm going to move on to, because I don't know anything about this now, the Leuven Perceptual Organization. I don't know anything about this, right? So I knew about the CVIT, right? And I've had a look at it, but I don't know anything about the Leuven Perceptual Organization Test. So tell us a little bit about that.
That one works in a similar principle. So it's also online. And I haven't said before, but both of them on nonverbal. So it's showing a matching to sample task, as we call it.
Yeah.
One picture at the top, 3 at the bottom, and you have to match which picture at the bottom is most similar to the one at the top. And how you match that differs. So sometimes you match because it's the same object, or because it's the things move in the same direction. So there are different ways you can match. So that's the same in both tasks. And Leuven Perceptual Organization Test is more around those mid-level visual functions. So building up a picture. And these are things like figure ground segregation, perceptual grouping. There is motion perception in there, like coherent motion, structure motion, biological motion. There is global and local processing. So whether you can pay attention to the details and the opposite. Also, can you see the overall picture, or do you get lost in details? So yeah, that taps into that. That one was originally developed for adults. So what I also didn't mention before, all the tests online are linked to a normative database. So you can compare your results of the child you've just tested with other children of the same age.
Right, typically developing or CVI?
Typically developing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. It gets better and better. I mean, I wasn't aware there were normative data sets to go along with it. So
yeah. Well, again, as a psychologist, I find out one of the essential things. So for me, that's normal. And so yeah, the CVIT has normative data from typically developing children between 3 and 6, and the LPOST has them for adults, so above 18. We had a lot of interest and questions about what are people in between.
Yeah. You're just going to get that.
Yeah, but we're working on that, so it's coming. But yeah, we have to start somewhere, and we started with the groups where we felt was the most need, which were the 2 extremes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and with adults and with stroke then, and also adults with maybe just recently detected CVI. Would it work for that? So it's not just particularly for stroke victims.
No.
Stroke people with strokes. Get the terminology right, and I apologize for that. So yeah.
Yeah, and also traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
I also think it can have an application in the elderly. There are certain types of dementia.
I was going to just come on to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So posterior cortical atrophy is another one where that can be used. So it's basically, for me, it's adults with visual processing issues due to something that's going wrong in their brain, whether that's a stroke or dementia or epilepsy.
Yeah, and like you say, so you're working on that gap between, you know, and stuff. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm just going back to CVIT to know a lot more. You know, that early years is so important, as we know, and we know all that developmental work in that, and you know, from 0 onwards, you know, trying to get the child to move and do all of that. And I mean, are you thinking of a very, very early years? Do you think that would be possible? I don't know. You know, we try and do that, and we know that we've got some intervention strategies like the developmental journal, and we look at Oregon Project and kind of things to work with children from very early years, you know, from 0 kind of thing. But in terms of assessment tests within that, I mean, it's really difficult, of course. But so yeah, any thoughts on the very early years?
Well, it's a very challenging age group. But my colleague Els Ortebus, she's been going for that challenge.
All right, yeah.
So yeah, you should definitely talk to her. They have been developing the GCV TOTS, which is for toddlers.
Yeah.
Which specifically aims at younger children. Yeah, it's more interactive.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's not an online tool, that one.
Yeah. I'll get to chapter L's. I'm pretty sure pretty soon. So I'm interested, right? And if you followed the conversation with Leuven and I, we have this debate about the role of language, and whereas I think, well, maybe is it language, is it classification, is it chunking kind of thing, and your test is non-verbal because you're doing this non-verbal perceptual test. But what you described there was, you know, this face matching and some of the activities. That seems to me classification and chunking. So I'm only saying this not really for you, Kathleen, but to Leuven. I'm going, you see, Leuven, I am right.
Yeah, when I said non-verbal, is that you can use it with non-verbal children.
Yeah, I know, but I
don't want claims about the use of language or whether it's essential or what a role it plays in it.
But it's, I mean, it's so useful now that, you know, we are beginning to get these tools as part of, you know, the terminology, I guess, the toolkit that we have to start to really having formalized normative assessment tests for children with CVI, you know, and then to take the results of that. So if I get a result either from the Leuven Perception Test or the CVIT test, you know, what can I do? What will it tell me?
Yeah, okay. So when you get to the end of the test, you get like a 1-page summary, and that tells you for each different test whether that child performed in the normal range or whether it's below a certain cutoff. So whether it's something that's quite an unusually low score. That's what it is. And then so you get it separately per subtest, but some of these subtests grouped together around certain themes. So if I think about the CVIT one, I think that's the most relevant for this conversation. So there are some subtests that look into object recognition. Mm-hmm. So how well are children doing in recognizing objects, and mostly in isolation versus in a context. So for instance, we show them a picture of a cat on its own, so with a white background, and then the same cat in a more busy environment. And we look at whether that makes a difference, whether they maybe easily recognize the cat when it's presented on its own, but not when it's surrounded with other visual information. Yeah. So it's object recognition in context, which also then relates to clutter. And then there is a set of tasks, degraded object recognition. So it's again recognizing objects, but the object is, some information is missing from it. So either the color is missing, or we only give a line drawing, so the details are missing from it. or we cover it in white noise, so put little gray and white blocks on it so you cannot see the whole picture very clearly. So that sort of challenges the visual system in different ways. And then there's a set around motion perception. So that relates to then, again, specific areas. So each of these tests is also linked to specific areas in the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really grounded in what we know from visual neuroscience. Yeah. So we look into motion perception, and there's 3 tasks that are sort of stepped. So first you have to understand the direction of motion. If your brain can process direction of motion, you can look into whether we can make a shape from this motion information. And then the next step is, can we put meaning to this shape? And that's the biological motion. So making sense out of point light walkers. And then there's a set of tasks around global and local processing. As I mentioned before, having a look at whether you can see the bigger picture or whether you can see the details about it.
Great. It's just fabulous. I think that it's open for use. I mean, it really is starting, again, another theme of mine. It is trying to understand what the child represents. What does that represent when the child, because as you know, and everyone knows who's watched these things, is we can't use our own vision, our own understanding of what we see onto the child, right? We just can't do that, right? So and so tools like yours, it seems, is helping us to understand that child's representation.
Yeah.
And I applaud you for that, I have to say. So thanks for that. So so you've done these 2 big, and I think they are big things, right? So I think it's great. What are you working on now? What other world-changing thing are you developing?
So there are 2 more projects on CVI I'm involved with at the moment. One with people in the Netherlands and Bartimeus. Mm-hmm. So that's mostly with Imke Pels and our team.
Oh, yeah.
And then one that I is still doing with Els, so a different project with her. So the one with Bartimeus, we recently finished that one, actually. So that was looking into the very young children. When you can't do like a very systematic assessment yet, but you can do maybe some basic tests, but also mostly have to rely on what parents tell you they have observed. So in these younger children under the age of 3, what are the early indicators for CVI?
Right.
Quite often parents will come, hopefully find their way to you and ask you like what's going wrong, but you can't make a diagnosis yet at that age. It's mostly about following them up and see them a few years later, see which of these skills have developed and which skills didn't, and see then with what story that fits best. So we were looking into what are these early indicators.
And are you able to give an answer to that? It would be amiss of me not to ask that, or I know that you're still crunching some data on that. So
no. We've written a preprint of the paper on it, so people can read the details if they like. But like the 4 to 5 teams that came back in the stories of parents, of children, and of clinicians who regularly work with these children, is first of all the difficulty dealing with complex situations. So complex visual environments, cluttered scenes, and there's a lot of sensory input, which then results in the sensory overload. Yeah. So that was one thing that already showed up at a very early age.
Right. So without doubt, this is showing up very early then. So
it's showing up very early, and we think that is an indicator of CVI.
Right. Okay.
So that is quite unique to CVI compared to other developmental problems.
Right. Okay.
That's what we were looking at. How can we see difference between a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old who will further along the line be diagnosed with CVI and someone who might get a diagnosis of autism or something.
Right, and so this is part of I can't remember if I described it earlier in different things. Part of that differential diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
Being able to because all we have is behavior, right? We can't we can't do anything else, right? All we have is behavior. So you're able to, like, by looking at this behavior, looking at trying to identify these early factors, and one being visual scenes and behavior.
Sort of what are the red flags? But I have to say, this was really an explorative study, so we had really at the early stages of these are just our ideas, but we still need to test this further.
Sure.
But the other one which came up a lot was navigation, and just that children navigate the world in a different way. So for instance, unusual head movements when they're walking around, feeling with their feet when they're walking, seem to have difficulties, they're unsure about depth. What for us is a very clear step down is less for them. I feel whether is it going down or is this just a change from carpet to tiles. So yeah, how they interact with the world and navigate around the world seems to be different from typically developing children.
Right, okay.
Another thing that came up a lot in those stories was what I would call multisensory integration. So combining information from different senses. So it's the one thing that we hear a lot from parents is, he's looking at me, but he's not listening. So doing at the same time visual information and auditory information, that is too challenging. So integrating this information is difficult. Another thing that comes up is that it changes a lot, so that it's very variable. So sometimes children can see things and then a few moments later or an hour later, not anymore.
I mean, I think that's something that we should never underestimate, is it really that variability, that within each, as I said yesterday about one of my dancers picked it up on the project I'm doing, where they said, it seems to me CVI is variable across children and variable within children.
Exactly.
Individual child. So that's, like I said, I figured I'd done my teaching well as she caught that on it within an hour. I got success, because that's exactly right, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we got mobility, which is quite interesting to look at, and that's really interesting because I've just done a talk to UK mobility hab officers around difficulty in accessing early years, right? And the importance of why we need to access early years. So some authorities might not be allowing early years access to families and children, right? It only happens when it goes to school, maybe not even there. So if mobility and observation of that mobility is one of your red flags, then I think that's a really key key preliminary finding. I'm not saying that. So we've got the visual clutter, which I'm not too surprised about. The orientation I am surprised about, and the multisensory one. Yeah.
And then the last one, but that also shouldn't be a surprise, I think, is that they find recognition and identifications of objects and faces and shapes quite challenging.
Right. Yeah.
This research was a qualitative study, really talking to parents and
who knows the children better, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but that also means that hopefully to parents and clinicians, these results don't come as a surprise.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also. I mean, I've not read the paper, and I'm sure I will do. But it's really interesting. So from a theoretical position, what would I have said have been the red flags, and it affirms both our research and affirms what parents are telling us, isn't it? That we get this. That mobility one's interesting. I might push not push back on you, but push back on why we need to have habilitation really early on, to maybe look at children and their mobility And is that behavior described in your paper to you know, that how that topographic agnosia maybe is within that, and how they actually then move within that 3D world?
Yeah, like Robin Schouwers, who has done all the interviews and she's written the paper. Yeah, she describes some of the quotes and includes some of the quotes from what parents and clinicians have said, and how they see that expressed, how they see that in the child's behavior.
All right, great, fantastic. I'm so pleased we've managed to get together and
You're curious now.
Yeah. It's just like, so where can I find that? Is it on your website yet?
It's on SciArchive, but I'll
okay, yeah.
include it in the.
I might put a wee link on that then as well. I'll find that and put a wee link on that. So that's good. Okay. And you got one briefly, because I don't want to take up all your time, because you know, I can talk for hours. Is how and your recent work with ELSE.
Oh yeah, ELSE. So ELSE is doing a project looking into developing treatments for children with CVI. If you're going to talk to ELSE, maybe I shouldn't say too much. And
okay. But it's the theme.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So she's developing games for children with CVI, and make sure that they train certain visual functions in the game.
Okay. Yeah.
Which visual functions they train for is individually adjusted for each child based on what's shown during the diagnostic process, as what is challenging, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the child, and which of these should we train, and which one, but yeah, you should definitely ask her about that.
Yeah, no, I will do. All right, I'm going to ask just a couple more questions there again. So whilst and I don't want anyone to get this impression, so you know, you're psychology based, vision science, vision neuroscience within that, but actually it seems to me that your work and the results of your work is really important in a multidisciplinary framework. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. I'm a psychologist by background, I often say. But I work with people from various disciplines, and I find that very enriching. And I learn a lot by listening to occupational therapists, physio, speech and language therapists, ophthalmologists, optometrists, orthoptists, psychiatrists too, pediatricians. And I think that's where the value is, that we work together and learn from each other, and use all that joint knowledge and expertise also in the diagnosis of CVI.
Yeah, and I think, you know, hopefully for those parents and children who are watching this and listening to this, we are talking to each other. You know, I think within CVI very much so, we are a field that we've realized the value of talking to each other.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Partly some of the reason why I started this is to demonstrate, you know, that we do talk to each other. We want the expertise of speech language, of OTs, optoms, psychologists, and things like that. And I think that it is reassuring, you know, and because of that, you've developed these excellent tools.
Yeah. But I didn't develop those on my own. It was only through insights from other disciplines that we were able to. Yeah,
and of course then, you know, it'd be interesting to see if from these tools being used, if they will be then picked up by different areas, you know. I think that's how it grows. And again, you know, my philosophy has always been, what I think is good for children with CVI may be good for all, you know, and we can start to think about how we can have, you know, inclusive tools that can be developed, I think. So yeah, great, brilliant. So finally, I guess, is there anything you want to add or to say that, or a question I should have asked you and I didn't? That you've been doing it, you know, dying to say?
No, I don't think a question. I would like to make a little comment. I really I agree with what you said just before about the CVI community and that we really talk to each other. And I think that's a real strength. And I know it can be very challenging for children and parents to find the right support, but I'm very much convinced that there is a community out there that we are there for them, and that we do want to make things better. And we're trying, all from different parts of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And from all our different experience and background and knowledge. And also are learning from the children and the parents themselves. But I think it's a very supportive community. And I'm very happy to be part of that.
Well, me too, and we're so happy that you are part of it, you know, and I think it's fabulous, right? It's fabulous that that we're getting these tools, we're talking together, and we're starting to really drill down now, you know. And I think
there's still a lot for us to learn.
We're on this journey. But we're definitely, to stretch the metaphor a bit, we're definitely on the bus, you know. I think we are on the bus. We haven't got anywhere yet, but we're definitely on the bus.
And we want to make it work. I think that's very, very strong motivation within the CVI community to move forward. Forward together.
Well, Dr. Vancleef, Kathleen, I thought I'd formally give you your full title at some point. I just want to say thank you very much. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time. And I will put on all the links, and the link to the new paper on the YouTube and onto the university channel as well. I just want to say thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and
it was a real pleasure being here. I very much enjoyed it.
I just can't wait, and hopefully I can't wait till your next paper comes out. What else are you going to do? It's brilliant. All right, take care now and have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.